It's been an interesting short-term watch, particularly driven by flows into the Bitcoin ETFs. I note on the Bloomberg there's a brilliant story about the enthusiasm for Bitcoin ETFs in Korea, for example. Just let's start the conversation with how you are and what you're thinking about right now.
Yeah, listen, Bitcoin has broadly doubled since November. So let's hold this in context, right? We had a 35,000, dollar price 5 months ago, and we're now 70,000. And so it's been a monster rally. That rally was mostly fueled by adoption, right? With the ETF, it made it very easy for people in the U.S. institutions and the wealth channel, most importantly, to access Bitcoin for the first time. What's happening at the same time this is happening in the U.S., we're launching ETFs ETPs, with DWS in Europe. We've got a partnership with Itaú in Brazil, and you're seeing people around the world participating in the simpler form of Bitcoin, right? An easier access form. And so I think this is just starting. Like, what will happen to prices? Prices are going to consolidate for a while between 75 and maybe 62 or even 58. You could see a consolidation, but each 100 days our government's adding $1 trillion of debt. Right, we're at 34 trillion right now. We'll be at 35 trillion, and then 40 trillion. That story is so powerful. It makes it easy for salespeople, right, for registered investment advisors to tell their clients, put a couple percent of your net worth in Bitcoin. And you're seeing that happening. This is a process that's going to go for years, not for months.
Mike, let's then have a robust and healthy debate about this. Jack Mallers, who I'm sure you are aware of or at least know, was on the show this week talking about the same thing. He looked at inflation, he looked at debt, and he makes the point that because there are a finite volume of Bitcoin, that the price will continue going up in the context of those economic factors. The pushback that I gave him was, well, actually, if you look at Bitcoin trading, there's a lot of short-term liquidity, and the market doesn't think that inflation is going to tick higher over a medium and long-term basis from this point. So let's get back into it, where Bitcoin fits into a portfolio for an investor who is thinking about the national debt, who is thinking about what is happening with rates.
Listen, you could have bought a house in America in 2012 for $190,000, and today that number's about $400,000. Right? And so when you print as many dollars as we're printing, forget what the headline inflation number looks at, because you have asset inflation that doesn't go into CPI. At times you have food inflation. And so you have lots of different inflations. The purchasing power of the underlying currency goes down, right? Look how much silver a British pound gets you today. Certainly does not get you a pound of silver. The long-term history of governments is that they debase their currencies, and we're in that process. And we've got an election coming up between Biden and Trump, both who I think will expand the balance sheet. We're running 25% of GDP as a federal budget. That number should be 20. So we're 5% of GDP off of where a real good, tight government would be spending. And I just don't see that changing, right? Populism is taking over the world. It's a very scary world in that respect. But Trump is a populist and Biden is a populist. We don't have a centrist in the system. And so I'm really skeptical that we're going to have a Simpson-Bowles amendment or something to balance the budget or someone to cut spending. And until that happens, it's easy to sell Bitcoin.
Near term, things are going pretty well for you in Galaxy Digital. You swung to a profit in the quarter. Reflect on that and how meaningful it is.
Well, it feels very different than it did 6 months ago, right? Our phones are ringing off the hook. We've gotten into the staking business. We'll have over $1 billion, $1.5 billion staked, which wasn't 6 months ago. We were barely in that business. That's part of our infrastructure part. Our mining, we're mining coins cheaper than anyone else, any public company and any private company I can see, because we're so well situated in Texas. So our mining business is doing well. Our derivative business is booming. Lending is picking up. People are lending us money at much cheaper rates than they used to lend us money. And institutional partners are reaching out and looking at how can we work together. And so when I look at it all together, it just feels like a different business than it did 6 months ago. We made money. We own a lot of assets. Assets went up. Our businesses made money. Our operating businesses are running profitable. And so could it be more exciting?
Mike, just real quick, I think you told investors that work on Delaware was ongoing and a NASDAQ listing ongoing. Do you have any updates on both of those items?
Listen, what I told investors was for 2.5 years, we have been working diligently with the regulator, the SEC here, trying to get redomiciled to the U.S. and listed on the NASDAQ. There was a change of philosophy after Jay Clayton in the last administration left and Gary Gensler in the new administration came in. And just looking at the facts, no companies that do anything other than Bitcoin have made it through as public companies. And it's been frustrating. It feels very un-American, right? That we've got this one group of companies that got public, that have access to the capital markets, that have access to cheaper funding, and we're waiting on the sidelines still. I am optimistic that things will change. You know, there's an election coming up. No matter who wins the election, I think there'll be turnover at the regulators. I think Democrats are realizing that crypto is, you know, the American public is voting. They're voting that they really like Bitcoin, they like digital assets, and they like crypto. And so politicians usually can sense where the wind is blowing, and the wind is blowing at the backs of the people who are engaged in crypto. I think you're going to see it as a big factor in a few elections. This, you know, John Tester's election in Wyoming, Sherrod Brown, the crypto PACs are going after in Ohio because they've stood in the way a little bit. And so I think the Democrats are going to learn and have learned. When I'm in D.C., most Democrats I talk to, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, they see this as a bipartisan issue. But it's been a small handful that have stopped any real advancement of legislation and pushing the SEC to, you know, to kind of look at this industry as a tech-forward industry, a future-forward industry, and to be fair to all the players.